Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Movies and Shows, an extension of the Mythic Mind Fellowship, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Alright, welcome back to Mythic Mind Movies and Shows. It's been a little while since we wrapped up the Star Wars series at the end of last year, running through all the Star Wars movies, including the holiday special. And now we are taking a bit of a different format now that we're returning, in that each week one of us will just be picking a different movie for us to watch, more of a movie club style. For this first one, I mostly let the Discord decide, and I knew going into that we would end up watching anime, which is just not really something that I've watched since I was in middle school watching Pokemon. And I don't have any particular reason for having this prejudice towards anime, other than it just hasn't been something that's really interested me. But that being said, I did enjoy this movie. I'm not going to say it radicalized me, and I'm going to go binge, I don't know, Dragon Ball Z or something. But I can't say that I enjoyed it. Obviously, it has good artwork, it has good music, and it tells a story that is interesting and worth telling. Even though I don't have the Japanese folklore background that I'm sure is coming through a lot of this, I still enjoy it as fantasy. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and I look forward to getting into it. But let's start with just whatever opening statements you all want to say. I know that you are all probably much more familiar with this than I am, so I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say, and I'll obviously contribute where I think I can. So let's go clockwise as I have you here. Kit, why don't you start us off with whatever you want to say?
All right. Well, I guess I can go in a little bit about the story. I have this book, The Starting Point of Hayao Miyazaki. So he does have what's he got here? It's a memo for his plan to make this. And so just really quick, the project plan is to depict the unchanging nature of humans by overlapping the turmoil of the Muromachi period, just as the medieval framework collapsed, with the upheaval of our era as we head towards 21st century. This is a vivid period action drama woven from two threads, a vertical thread of the struggle between humans and sprites over a beast god, boar god, and a horizontal thread of the meeting between a girl raised by wolves, a fierce fighter who despises humans, and a boy who has a death curse placed upon him. This meeting is key to their liberation. So he decided to make this film. He was targeting upper elementary school students and above and the general public because Miyazaki well, he wants to make his films for everyone ultimately, but he does have a target audience in mind. And so this being the youthful boys, then you get this action drama that goes into, like you said, more of a fantasy that's from the Japanese style, from a very important period, which is where we have the influx of religion, um, re recurrence of Shinto Buddhism. Jesuit Christians are coming in at this time period, and all this is kind of playing into what usually is depicted as peasantry and warlords and samurai. But Miyazaki didn't want any of that. He wanted that all in the background. So what he ends up doing is he puts humans first. He puts that at the forefront, and that's in the two characters, Ashitaka and San, or Momonoke. Mononoke. There we are. So,
Yeah. And I don't think I mentioned the name of the movie that we watched, but it's in the title of this episode, so I guess that's pretty clear. All right, well, cool. Appreciate that background introduction there. Dalen, tell us something about this movie.
So it's been quite some time since I have watched this movie, but for me, Princess Mononoke was really the first anime that I watched, somewhat similar to you, Andrew. But it did start me down the path of watching other further anime. It really introduced me to the concept that you can use animation, specifically Japanese animation, to tell a worthwhile story with characters and themes that um, may not be easily communicated through other mediums. And so I I credit it in many ways with allowing me to experience a number of stories that I wouldn't have otherwise even thought of just due to a prejudice toward or against animation as being purely something to tell children's stories. So I think that it was helpful for me in that way, and just being able to really tell a complex story with characters that aren't necessarily like they're human. They're not it's not a simple story of just good forest spirit fights bad people, townspeople. And I appreciate for that.
Yeah, that's something that I appreciate as well. It's not just nature is good and people are bad. That obviously it's more sophisticated kind of story. It's showing that like, nature can go bad, people can be good. Right? It can go in both directions. So I'm sure we'll get into that more. Micah.
Yeah, I have like very distinct emotional associations in with this movie that are kind of jumbled. So I got into anime relatively recently, like probably like 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't grow up watching Dragon Ball Z or anything. And I think I watched Princess Mononoke before that because I knew about Studio Ghibli because that Ghibli carried a positive connotation in the West sooner than a lot of other anime did, and that's one reason why, like in my head, I don't automatically associate it with anime, because it feels like a lot of people treat it as a very distinct, like artistically um, valid body of works. That it took longer for a lot of anime to really get to that level in the Western culture. Right now, these days, anime is pretty widely accepted and loved, but back in like a decade plus ago, that was less so. So, and Ghibli, I think, got in inroads a lot faster. And it has a very unique art style that all those movies have, and Mononoke included. So I remember when I was asking around, I was like, okay, so what are some Ghibli movies to start with? Because I want to get into these. And someone said Princess Mononoke is the number one movie out of that studio. And so I was like, okay, we'll watch this. And it just so happened I had a whole bunch of friends who wanted to watch the movie who had not seen it. And so they all came over and I had a big party at my house. We watched Princess Mononoke. And then they all hated it, like every single person, including the person who had specifically requested it, hated it. Apparently, he had not seen it. He just heard it was really good. So I felt like I had to apologize to people because they hated it so much. So that's why I'm saying I have a very weird mental association with this movie. So I feel like you kind of have to go in like mentally prepped for it, which I don't know if that's necessarily true for other Ghibli movies. But this one feels like one of the things is it's very animistic, and very oriented around, like you said, Japanese folklore, which for us in the West, a lot of it feels very foreign and very strange if you're not like at least somewhat versed in kind of how the Japanese traditionally view nature and gods and kami, kodamas or whatever those little jiggling rock creatures are. Um, so I watched it again a couple of months ago with a different group that appreciated the movie much more. And I still think it's probably not one of my favorite movies, but I think it is artistically interesting and has some interesting philosophical stuff that I know we'll get into, particularly like relating different views on how to look at man's relationship with nature. And I imagine you guys like coming from like the more Tolkien type perspective on that. Tolkien had things to say about that, so I find that kind of thing an interesting comparison. Um, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, interesting movie, just not one of my favorites. And honestly, I need to watch more Ghibli movies besides this one.
Yeah, I do think that some interesting comparisons could be made with Tolkien. Um, even though operating from different root worldviews, nonetheless, what they do have in common is emphasis on that relationship of humans to nature. That obviously is an important thing that Tolkien emphasizes. Now, I have to ask, when you're having your first princess party, as I'm going to call it, why did they hate it? Is there a predominant reason?
I don't know exactly. I think a lot of it is like it's a movie you have to pay close attention to keep track of anything that's going on. And there were a lot of people who just wanted to talk and hang out. And then there were all these weird things happening. Like, why is there this giant gross boar on the screen with worms all over him? And so, like, all the girls were grossed out that were there. Not to stereotype women or anything, but like the ones that were there were very grossed out. And then my friend who'd recommended it just didn't like animism, I think. So it's like everybody had a different reason to dislike it, but I think that was just a bad group for that watching it.
Yes, to avoid any charges of misogyny, there are many women who love disgusting demon boars. So no
It's
offense
very true.
intended. David, tell us something about this movie.
All right. Well, I mean, technically, this was my pick, and I did enjoy it. I would have loved to do any Ghibli movie, but I felt like this was a good introduction for you, Andrew, just because of some of the themes that were in it that we can talk about later. But uh, one thing that's interesting to me is that, in nearly all Studio Ghibli films, the protagonist is a young, resilient woman. Miyazaki, he's a self-proclaimed feminist. Uh, but Princess Mononoke features, it's got several strong women in it, but the protagonist is this disciplined young man who is fighting to stop the hate and the violence between, the old natural world and the industriousness of humanity. But like you said, it's not like Fern Gully where nature's good and humans are bad, and if you carve your initials in a tree, you're a monster. Uh, there's something deeper being expressed here than some kind of ecological message. And I like that Miyazaki doesn't seem to want us to pick a side between Lady Eboshi or uh, Princess Mononoke. The characters, they're complex. Like Eboshi, she buys the freedom for these prostitutes and gives them work in her foundry, and she takes care of lepers, but they make weapons for her. And Princess Mononoke is defending her adopted wolf family, because her human parents just threw her at Moro to try and free themselves, and she was so disgusted that she raised her. Trying to defend the forest and but all the talking animals, they hate humanity as a whole and want them dead. So I I love how Ashitaka is so disciplined, and I think that's what makes his cursed arm with a mind of its own such a great plot device, because we see a visual representation of not letting hate take control of who you are and what you do. And when Yakul, his elk, gets shot with an arrow and he's got to protect him, that's the only time you really see the curse starting to spread uh, because he's so angry and trying to defend. So um, I love the fantastical aspect of his arm allowing him to shoot people's heads off and things like that. Like I love that really fantastic aspect of the story. But anyway, yeah, that'd be my opening statement.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that the first time he started taking off arms and heads.
Yeah,
I was not ready for that, but
yeah,
it's definitely a cool image if you're into decapitations, I guess.
yeah. This is the only Ghibli movie that is not for small children, really. I mean, they're not all for small children, but most of the other ones, some of them are scary in the right ways for children, if that makes sense, you know. But this one just, yeah, the gore is what earned it its rating.
Fair enough. All right, Ian.
So I had actually seen Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle in college, and I had a friend who was always saying, you always complain about how Viggo Mortensen plays Aragorn in Return of the King. Because my big criticism of Viggo Mortensen is that he's playing a reluctant leader. And he says, Ashitaka in Princess Mononoke is the kind of forthright, bold leader that you would love. But because I am a contrary person, I decided not to watch it until I was in grad school when he finally convinced me to watch it. And it instantly became my favorite of all the Ghibli films. I've seen most, but not all of the Ghibli films in theaters that have come out since then. But this one remains my favorite because, as David mentioned, its complexity of characterization resists the kinds of simplistic uh, good good hero versus bad witch or bad demon, or all the characters, including the animal characters, have a lot of richness and depth and sympathy even when they're doing the wrong thing, and trade-offs even when they're doing the right thing. But I think what I love most is that the ending, even though it's coming from, both Shinto animistic and Buddhist religious traditions, to me, it's an example of, all the Christ hauntedness of reality. You have a God who dies, and in death, his blood, all the weird clear goo, heals lepers and heals the curse. And like they repeat, the whole world's under a curse. And that to me is such a powerful picture of the fallen world and the redemptive power of a dying God who must rise again. And even though I seriously doubt that Miyazaki intended that, I think that echoes just the structure of reality in the Christian world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And this is why, as a Christian, I can find great value in stories that aren't necessarily told by Christians, whether they're talking about the pagan mythologies or contemporary fiction that's doing fiction well, in that a good story is in some level going to echo the true story. Right? And this is the idea that we get very clearly through the likes of C.S. Lewis, and something that we talk about repeatedly on these shows. Yeah, I think that is an excellent point. That yeah, I don't know that I need to elaborate on that. Now, looks like we have maybe a couple people here who aren't visuals. Jacob, did you want to say anything about this movie? It's okay if not, but I just wanted to add that in there. Okay. And I think Zach said he just wanted to listen, and that's fine. Mic isn't working. Okay, well, if it does, then you're welcome to jump in. All right. So I guess let's see where we want to go from here. So the basic premise of the movie is the main character, let's see, Ashitaka, that's that right? Okay. Ashitaka. So his village it gets attacked by this crazy demon boar that he fights off. He kills it, but in the process he gets infected. His arm gets infected. And so he has this demon curse on his arm that drives him into great rage on occasion, though as David said, he's generally reserved and kind of keeps it in check. But because of this curse, he has to leave his village, and he's treated as if he's already dead. And so he has to go off, and there's this great line. I don't have it directly in front of me, where he's told before he goes off that you can't change your fate, but you can decide how you meet it, or something along those lines, which is a great line. It's the kind of thing that I mean, obviously you get that idea in Tolkien. You get it. You can frame that from a number of different philosophical backgrounds, whether we refer to fate or fortune or facticity or whatever. The point is, so much of life is just given to us that we have no control over. But what we can control is how we relate to what is given. And so he has to decide what to do with this. In fact, later on, he's going to be told, why don't you just jump off a cliff and kill yourself? Like, that's one option he could take. But he decides to pick the path of hope, the path of determination. And so he goes off looking for a cure with this great forest spirit, who's like the god of gods of this nature pantheon that we're given. But it's not going to be that easy. And along the way, he encounters these people from what was the name of the town? Iron something?
Yeah,
Ironworks.
Yeah,
Well,
okay. So it's basically this industrialized, militaristic town where this woman has taken in lepers and former prostitutes, the outcasts essentially, and given them a purpose. But that purpose is to kill the nature god, essentially. And so, they're making weapons for her. She's waging war against nature. She's obviously a symbol of, progress and industrialization, that sort of thing. And she wants to literally kill the god of the forest as a way of dominating nature instead of relating to nature. Whereas our protagonist wants to establish peace between them. And we eventually find that the reason why this demon boar that attacked him at the beginning, how it became a demon, is it was shot with one of their bullets, right? And then it basically became a demon as conflict begets conflict, rage begets rage, violence begets violence. And so it's kind of, we get this portrayal of like these gods of the forest have the ability to turn into demons if they give themselves over to the dark side, right? to their rage. And then they essentially become these just ravenous monsters. And obviously the main point of the story is just that kind of violent domination mindset just continues to replicate itself again and again and again. And so what we need is peace. That is the ultimate protagonist. That is the goal, peace itself, harmony. And so that's the basic philosophy of the story. Would anyone else like to add to that as far as overarching themes or kind of whatever else I might be missing?
There's another layer to that as well. So Miyazaki, at this point for this film, we had a rising of digital animation, which is used in this film. The worms and everything on the Boar God are done with CGI, which Miyazaki was not a fan of. So not only do we have the iron bullets going into the Boar God and corrupting it, he also sees it in another way as the in modernization of the way animation is going to be is going to corrupt his own hand drawn, the connection to uh, the art that he wants to make, the story he wants to tell.
Yeah, and this is the last major Japanese animated film that was done on, you know, physical photographing cells animation. So that is kind of an interesting the melding of the old ways with the new ways that he sort of reluctantly accepted. But as Captain Anderson from Mass Effect says at the beginning of the movie, it's an age of gods and demons. I was surprised when I heard him. I'd forgotten that was who did it. He's also the voice of what is it, Okoto, the old boar god later in the film. Uh, but um, I can't help but wonder if Miyazaki has actually read the Chronicles of Narnia because there are a few things in this that seem kind of reminiscent, like um, the boar demon at the beginning killing everything it touches reminds me of the description of Tash moving through the forest in the last battle. And of course, we have the talking animals who are larger than the dumb animals and those sorts of things. But and Shishigami, the forest spirit, um, I wouldn't equate with Aslan, but it's a lot closer to um, an omniscient kind of a god than just because in regional gods are a very Shinto thing in Japan, but the forest spirit, he's so other, really. Moro the wolf, I think, has two tails, but apart from that, all the other ones are just big animals that can talk. But Shishigami looks like this deer with an almost human face, but it doesn't ever speak and it walks on water. People are afraid to even look at him. And then the way the plants are growing and dying beneath his feet, that also kind of reminded me of Aslan at the creation in The Magician's Nephew. Um, but he can choose to heal or kill with a touch. And I kind of feel like the fact that he heals Ashitaka's bullet wound but doesn't heal his curse, and how he kills Okoto when he's coming in there all enraged, he can no longer even speak because the hunters are wearing the skins of his brethren. It's really kind of a ghastly scene. Um, I think it feels like the forest spirit is saying like, our time has ended pretty much. Um, And I think that's kind of a recurring theme in Ghibli movies. Like one of my favorites, which is a weird one, but Pompoko. Uh, it's about these tanukis, which are Japanese raccoon dogs, and they're fighting the loss of their habitat, but they're like magical creatures and not just animals in this story. There's a lot of Japanese folklore about shape-changing tanukis, but they're having to learn to adapt to this expanding urban sprawl or else they're going to die out. But humans aren't vilified in that movie either. They're just seen as kind of an inevitability. And the moral for us, I suppose, is just we should do our best to live in harmony with the natural world, not that we're monsters who should be ashamed for existing, as some would have us see it.
I was going to say, I think it would be very interesting if he had the Lewis background while he was making this, but for sure he was definitely looking at the Jungle Book because Mononoke is very much a Mowgli character. in the sense that she's raised by wolves and becomes more natural. I mean, there's a scene in the movie where we have the apes that want to eat a man to become more like a man, which is a twisting of King Louis in the Jungle Book. So, and obviously they didn't see Mononoke as, or San as a human at that point, so never touched her. But Ashitaka, right on the menu.
Yeah, that
I mean,
I when I watched it with some friends, Micah, that was where I lost a lot of them, was when the apes are going, "Let us eat the man and we will gain." They're like, "What are we even watching now?" But to be fair, it was like people from my Sunday school class and not really anime fans that I was watching it with.
we know that Miyazaki was aware of both the Diane Wynne Jones books because he adapted Howl's Moving Castle, and of course the Earthsea books. That was a long um, struggle, and he actually wasn't the one who directed it, but um, his company was, and his son was the director. So I would not at all be surprised if he had some familiarity with Lewis's work, just in terms of children's fantasy and that general literature. He shows a lot of awareness of genre and tropes and narrative structures.
Yeah, and kind of related to something you brought up, Andrea, I think one of the more interesting thematic things going on in this movie is that the people who are trying to basically destroy the forest are not all portrayed as like evil. Like that's very unusual in movies with these kind of themes, to at least what I think of them as. Usually, like if someone's trying to like destroy the forest, or in this case, a forest spirit, like they must be the villains and therefore they have to be destroyed. But that's not how this movie works. It's like it doesn't portray that as a good thing at all. It's clearly criticizing that, but at the same time, like what is it, Eboshi, her name? Like she's a very sympathetic character in this story, to where you're like when you're watching, you're like, I might be to some degree on her side. Like I don't think she needs to go as far as she's going, but um, yeah, I think the complexity of humanity is one of the more interesting things going on in this movie, and how it's like it's not trying to like oversimplify things.
I will say I take a contrarian position on Lady Eboshi. I think she is the most heroic character in the movie, and everyone gets really mad at me when I say that. But I think that the fact that she lives, even though she has to repent, as represented by losing her arm, shows that her heart is of compassion and provision rather than of hate, as Ashitaka thinks.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, before her repentance, the compassion that she has is a twisted kind of compassion, right? In that she takes the people in who otherwise wouldn't have a place in the world, but she doesn't give them a wholesome upbuilding purpose, right? She basically lists them as soldiers, or at least part of her military complex to dominate the forest.
I
Now,
mean, the other option is for them to be murdered by the samurai, like all the other villages Ashitaka passes.
fair enough. But I suppose, I mean, what I wouldn't necessarily say that she had their best human interests at heart at first. I mean, would you disagree with that? Even if it might be better for them pragmatically, like, sure.
I think that she's always a mixed character. I think that she definitely comes in with ambitions to compete with the local samurai, and she makes deals with the emperor. Um, but I think that she also always had a compassion. I mean, she didn't have to rely on lepers and prostitutes. She could have recruited from local villages and gotten nice, strong men and doing all the stuff that she wanted to do, opened her own brothel. But instead, she kind of sets up a much more egalitarian, even family oriented, in that she allows marriages between her workers and her former prostitutes rather than having some kind of brothel system in place.
Fair enough. But she still wanted to cut off the head of the god, and that's not cool.
I agree. Yeah, but yeah, yeah, they have matchlock rifles and cannons, and so the setting it seems to be around like the 1400s, probably is what people speculate. But yeah, Japanese society, as you were kind of hinting to there, Ian, it was pretty disorganized mess of feudal lords and samurai at that point. It was going to be a couple hundred more years before the Tokugawa shogunate finally unifies Japan, and you get kind of a sort of peace at least around the whole country. But what I think is interesting is that Ashitaka is not ethnically Japanese at all in the story. You know, Billy Bob, the Buddhist monk, points out that he's from the Emishi tribe. And so I looked that up on Wikipedia, and it said the Emishi were an indigenous autonomous people inhabiting northern Honshu, is in the Tohoku region where the great earthquake was and tsunami in 2011. And they resisted the Yamato-led Japanese state from the 7th to the 9th centuries. So he says it had been like 500 years since they were supposed to have been wiped out. So that works out pretty good. But they were known as skilled horse archers and guerrilla fighters, and they maintained a distinct culture relying on hunting and fishing before being largely assimilated or pushed into Hokkaido, which is the northern island of Japan, to mix with the Ainu, who the Ainu are a more well-known native uh, ethnic group in Japan that predate the actual Japanese, the same way that, you know, the Chickasaws predate uh, me moving to the town that I live in here in Oklahoma. Uh, but I feel like I'm guessing that Miyazaki probably made Ashitaka a native rather than Japanese so that the Japanese viewers wouldn't so easily paint themselves or their society as the heroes in the story, you know. So the protagonist is kind of an outsider even to Japanese culture.
And making him an outsider who's from this supposedly extinct peoples really sets him out as this sort of timeless fairy tale type of hero, right?
Hmm.
And so that's a good point of context.
Yeah, the Muromachi period was from Miyazaki's words. The Muromachi period was intrinsically different from the Warring States period when organized battles were fought by regular standing armies, and it was also different from the Kamakura period when warriors fiercely protected their allotted land holdings. So this is a period of mobility for them. The peasants are less entrenched, and the warrior class is not as distinct. So, and even this is more, he chose this specifically because he sees it as more broad-minded, looking at the paintings from the time that show women as craftsperson. So he
Hmm.
really, I mean, this is his wheelhouse right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in a little bit about the period that it took place in. Um, there's something about the way that the world is depicted that even compared to what people know about Japan or Japanese history today, it feels very distant, like distant past to what we know. And, it definitely does have like that mythical quality because of that. And I really did appreciate that because it felt different from what I know from my own, amateur studies of their history and mythology.
Yeah. And I feel like Ashitaka kind of embodies there's this Japanese principle of satoyama, which is kind of living in harmony with nature. Like sato means like a village and yama means mountain. So it's kind of like living at the edge of where the civilization and kind of the wilds are. And it's more about learning to live in harmony with nature and work together. But more than that, I think he embodies that line that Ian mentioned in the Discord, to see with eyes unclouded by hate. And when he says that to Eboshi, she laughs in his face about it, you know, and then shows him what she's working on there. But he treats all life with inherent dignity and value. And at multiple points in the film, he's seen as a traitor by both sides simply because he's having mercy on someone that they see as the enemy. You know, he rescues the men that Moro knocks off the cliff into the river, and he's gets shot through the chest because he's trying to carry San out of Irontown. And then San tries to stab him in the chest for rescuing Eboshi with the necklace that he gave her. Um, but he just doesn't want anyone to die, even though she just shot off the head of the great forest spirit.
So one question I had, which forgive me if this was something that should have been more obvious to me, but what is the corruption exactly that like is messing up the forest and causing people to get strange arms and stuff? Is that representative of hatred or is that something else?
I think it is supposed to be hate because Akoto, the great white boar, he starts to manifest the red slime um, when he's just driven so insane with rage by the skins of his warriors being used as disguise. And so I'm not. You could see it, and I was worried when I first watched the movie, but I don't think this is true, that there'd be like guns are bad. I think it's actually got a very complicated view of guns because they're seen as something that can help the helpless defend themselves. Like Lady Eboshi always pushing to have a woman's rifle so that they're not dependent on rapacious and corrupt men to defend themselves. So I think that it ultimately comes down to when you let anger and cruelty and pain and above all hatred be the dominant emotion. And it's why Ashitaka is the hero, is because with a very few exceptions, he's always acting to try and help other people. He's always acting to try and make the world a better place from truth and compassion. Um, and he is just a magnificent hero because of that. He's not perfect, as David pointed out. When Yakul, his elk, gets shot, he does kind of give in to his rage, but it's a rare occurrence.
It could also be like if you look at Miyazaki's other films, he does have a strong dislike for the West. Well, not really dislike. He loves the West, but he also doesn't like what the West represents in the way that the progress in general is something that's going to root out. I mean, even in this is progress. Ironworks is the next step that has to move into nature. And you look at Nazca Valley of the Wind, that's all built on the ruins of European architecture. You go into what's another one?
Castle in the Sky, where the technology slash magic is coveted by these modern train driving like, army people.
Right, and in Spirited Away, where the amusement park is being encompassed by nature, and that is the pathway into the spirit world, which is getting messed up. Even the river scene or the river god that's in that's just covered in sludge because of all the pollution and everything. So it's very strong for theme for him. It's one of his go-to motifs is to get this balance between what we've done and what nature is and how to preserve it, not entirely for uh, as the end goal, but hatred is exactly one of the things. He says right here, I will depict hatred, but only to show that there is something more valuable.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's right on. I mean, we see this, when the god becomes a demon, it's out of this giving into hatred. This is what caused the demon boar at the beginning was the hatred-born bullet, essentially. And then as far as the critique on progress goes, I mean, I think you can find this really in any true fantasy, Western or Eastern, that there's going to be this criticism, or at least at very least skepticism, kind of warning toward the idea of progress, of movement, because I mean, fantasy, and I've gotten into these fights before on over on X regarding what genres are. Does fantasy actually mean something beyond aesthetics? And I argue that it does. That sci-fi tends to be more oriented, kind of from the perspective ground up of technology, kind of where things are going. It tends to be more cautionary from within the world of becoming, kind of where we're headed. Whereas fantasy more naturally relates to timeless realities. And the world of being is always going to have skepticism toward the world of becoming, that's striving to become something else, kind of its own ambition. And so, whether you're looking at Tolkien, whether you're looking at this movie or others in this vein, I think that we're going to see the skepticism toward our Babel building, right? I think that's probably the best way to frame what I'm trying to get at. That we're trying to create something good without recognizing the goodness that's inherent in natural existence. And so the way to find peace with ourselves, peace with our humanity, is to be rightly in tune with nature, the nature into which our humanity is naturally contextualized. And so I think that we're going to see that in just about any fantasy, very much including in this movie. But at the same
I will,
time, human existence is good.
yeah, I was weirdly reminded of, speaking of science fiction, of Michael Crichton and Jurassic Park. Like that was actually one of the themes he was always interested in his books, was the idea of like basically be careful about messing with nature, because if you mess that up, which is very easy to do, you can cause really disastrous consequences. Now he did not come at it in his spiritual or his like transcendent perspective as a movie like this or even Tolkien, but I think it is a valid point to be cautious of how we interact.
I mean, anyone who is a fan of Lord of the Rings, I think, will see the clear parallels between Tolkien's attitude towards nature through the Ents and Miyazaki's cherishing of nature. Now, I never get a sense that Miyazaki thinks that nature should be more important than human lives. He has a very humanistic love of people and relationships, but he he thinks we should be more reverent and more we should seek to live to see ourselves as living with nature rather than exploiting nature. And I see the same thing with the way the Ents shepherd the trees and the anger they have at Saruman's very clear mimicking of industrialization. And even though I think the movie kind of exaggerated that, I think that's definitely in the text. I think that these two geniuses of fantasy both see part of the modern world and critique it in ways that I think we should heed, even though I do think that there's an anti human element to the environmental movement that also needs to be resisted.
I'd like to go back to what Ian said first about sin and just the curse of the iron bullet in itself. The second part that Miyazaki wanted to do in this film, he says, I will depict a curse to show the joy of liberation from it. And this being Japan, and knowing, if you know a little bit of the history of how Christianity has moved through Japan, you can look at Scorsese's film Silence, or even the book Silence, I suppose, and you see how the Jesuit missionaries are moving through, and they just don't get it. They think the sun god is the sun, so the son of, yeah. So they claim that we don't get that. That's not part of our culture, and they're very cordial about it. But we see that Japan, because it has such a close connection to nature, and this has always just been my sort of take on it, they're getting closer to the creator in that they get ever so close without actually knowing who Jesus is. But I just think the country and the way they look at the world is entirely primed to accept the gospel at some point. I mean, that'd be amazing. But as of right now, the Christians that exist in Japan, they are hidden once again. You see that in the movie Silence, where he has to give up his his faith and become live as a Japanese person, only to discover that he's held on to his cross at the end. That was Scorsese's touch. Um, but Japan does have a deep-seated connection to truth, to the way that the world is created, and the hidden Christians are amongst them. And I think, right here, just the way that he describes it, he wants to show the curse and the liberation. that is sin. And he even goes further, Miyazaki does, with the use of water on this curse. This is part of baptism. Every time it starts to act up, he has to baptize it. He has to, yeah, clean it with water, but it remains until the end.
I mean, let's say to your point there. I mean, C.S. Lewis says that he prefers open paganism to post Christendom, much for the same reasons you're just saying. He says that when people in England are decrying the fact that England's reverting to paganism, he says, "Would that she were," because paganism, at least at its best, it can be oriented in the direction of the truth, whereas post-Christianity is directed away from the truth, right? And so there's looking at what we get in, say, this movie. I mean, I can't speak very broadly to Japanese culture, religion, mythology, and whatnot, but as far as aside from just generally, um, that there is a lot of merit I can see in their appreciation of the natural, right? The kinds of themes we get through this movie. Even this baptism idea we get through this movie, which again, seems to be pretty clearly there, intentionally or not. Like it's clearly there, and so yeah, there's a lot that we could say is maybe oriented in the direction of Christianity, even if it doesn't necessarily go all the way.
What we call baptism, I mean, water in many cultures is just renewal and rebirth and cleansing. So, I mean, he could even be just coming at it from that angle.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
would
Go
argue
ahead.
that that was God's creation of water and promulgation through humanity on purpose. As you know, the myths of Balder and Odin dying and being reborn, they point to Christ. They're not, and you have Osiris as well. I mean, and I would say that things like water being connected with death and rebirth. And again, I return, the god of the forest dies, and in death his blood heals lepers. Like it's almost perfectly biblical, the symbolism there for me. um it's just really powerful, and that connection to Christianity um really is why I think it's the best thing he's ever done.
Well, also with the water, the forest god, at several points in the movie, you see him walking on the water, which also aligns with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. And in Shintoism, if you go to Japan, you visit a Shinto shrine, you there are fountains outside of the gates where there's like a cup on the end of a stick, and you get the water and you purify your hands, you put some in your hand, you purify your lips, and then you even clean the handle by tipping it up before you put the cup back down, and then you approach through the gates up to the shrine. Like, I feel like that is such an obvious entrance for the gospel to a Japanese person, that they have these ideas of purity and the purification of the water, and how we are not um, adequate, we're not good enough or pure enough to approach the divine. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think I've mentioned on one of these podcasts before, I went to a service at Tokyo Baptist Church, and it's right there in Shibuya, not too far from the famous Scramble Street crossing. And it's smaller than my church here in my little town of 18,000 people. Um, they have three services, but it's still a pretty small church, and it's probably one of the biggest Christian churches in Japan. So yeah, I would say it's ripe for the harvest, but we'll see.
We'll have to organize our mission trip.
Yes. So Ian, you brought up Shishigami, the forest spirit, when it dies and it spreads across the countryside and it puts out the fires of Irontown and it heals the lepers and covers everything with growth, which is another little piece of computer animation that they used in this film. Uh, I It kind of reminded me of the conversation that Ransom had with Merlin, um, where he said that the soul has gone out of the wood and water. I dare say you could wake them a little, but it wouldn't be enough. A storm or even a river flood would be of little avail against our present enemy. Your weapon would break in your hands. Whatever of spirit may still linger in the earth has withdrawn 1,500 years further away from us since your time. And I feel like Miyazaki is depicting this as the only reason we don't see this fantastical stuff is because it's just not that time anymore. That time has passed. And I know he doesn't really mean it in such a literal sense, but I do think that is a neat aspect of the fantasy world of the world of fairy basically that he's containing here. That in an earlier time it was closer to us, and now we're in a different era.
Yeah, that was kind of neat. How we're moving beyond the realm of fairy, but nonetheless, the same life that the god provided now still pervades nature. That's what he says at the end, that the god is obviously still present here, and that the forest has life, a new kind of life that it didn't even have before, even though it doesn't take such a personified form. And so it does have this idea of we're leaving fairy behind, but the life that it's connected with is still around us today. Yeah, that's a good connection to Ransom.
And there's still the little I don't know, baby rattle
One
spirits at the
Kodama.
very end,
Kodamas, yeah.
Yeah.
which I think give us hope that even though the forest spirit may no longer walk abroad, there's still more to the trees and nature than just the cellulose and chlorophyll.
So the other part of this film, as he said before, is the horizontal, the love story aspect. We can get into that. What his last thing that he wanted to do for this film was, I will depict the boy's understanding of the girl and the process by which the girl opens her heart to the boy. In the end, the girl will likely say to the boy, I love you, Ashitaka, but I cannot forgive humanity. Smiling, the boy will probably say, that's all right. Let's live together in peace.
Yeah, and so obviously it's not a traditional fairy tale love story in that that there's this great wedding at the end and they live happily ever after, but both I think personify the dual aspects of humanity here, in line with nature as well as simply in line with humanity, as well as the idea of progress in a productive, wholesome kind of direction. And so they're going to continue to have some distance between them. Yeah, it's going to be more amicable, a better relationship, even though they'll never be totally one flesh.
I mean, I've talked a lot about how I think the forest spirit has a lot of Christological connections, but I would also argue that Ashitaka himself has a lot of Christological connections. I mean, he's a prince, he's sent out under a curse. Um, he basically gives his life on multiple occasions for other people. And in the end, he's a bridge between two worlds. Now, obviously, he's not a bridge between God and man like Christ is a bridge between God and man, but I think the bridge itself is a Christological function. Part of the thing that we're enabled to do as Christians is to heal relationships and heal ourselves in sanctification. And I see Ashitaka as pointing us in that direction, even though he himself also needs to be healed. So I'm not saying he's like a pure Christ figure, but I think he has a lot of parallels to Christ that enrich the film and our understanding of relationships and romance, and of course the church and the church as the bride connection as well with romance.
So Andrew, I'm just curious, did you like it?
Yes, I did like it. I enjoyed it. I feel like it's a good entryway, I think, into anime, at least speaking from my own experience, and that I enjoy the story, as somebody who likes fantasy, likes Tolkien, likes Lewis, that sort of thing. Um, I appreciate the fantasy elements of this, and even though obviously it's pulling from Japanese folklore mythology that I'm not really familiar with. And you don't necessarily have to be to get the essence of what's going on a metaphysical level. And so, no, yeah, I enjoy the movie and I appreciate a lot of what they're doing philosophically along the way.
Now, did
So what
you
you're
watch
saying,
it with subtitles or dubbed?
I did watch it dubbed.
ah,
Nice.
yeah. So did I. I haven't seen it subbed, but I didn't like the dub,
Why
which I
not?
know I've talked to you guys about on Discord. Like, what is it, Billy Bob Thornton, who did the monk guy? Like, he is like one of the worst castings I've ever heard for a voice actor. Like, I
It
know he's great, but not for that character.
So the funny thing is, I recently watched the first season of Fargo, where he plays a hitman, and I really see, I mean, Jigo the monk is completely amoral, very dangerous. And I honestly get that same menace from Billy Bob in this performance. And I don't know, I just, the connection works for me. I can definitely see his southern accent in the Japanese setting is odd, but that sense of controlled menace really comes through to me.
Yeah. I don't think it's bad, but I do think it's the weirdest of the I mean, because they all of the Ghibli translations are star-studded. You know, they're all famous names, I think, to try and get Americans who might otherwise not be interested to watch it partly. But like I just never would have thought, okay, we have this giant uh wolf god. Let's give it the voice of Gillian Anderson from X-Files. That seemed like a pretty weird pick as well. Like, and Jada Pinkett Smith is a Japanese peasant in it, but
I'll
it
definitely give you
works.
Jada Pinkett Smith.
It works okay. Yeah, keep her name out your mouth, Ian.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't even like really like whether or not the actors were really trying to get the characters right. It was like, so anime dubs, I don't know if it's like how Japanese is spoken versus English is spoken, but like it always feels, not always, but in a lot of anime, it feels like dubs are trying to compress the English lines into too tight a space, which makes it feel not natural.
Right.
And I've done just enough theater when I was younger to like care a lot about intonation and inflection, that sort of thing. And when you have to cram your line in a tight space, it just destroys a lot of the inflection. It just sounds wrong to my ears. And some anime, I feel like more modern anime tends to like, I guess because they animate it knowing it'll get dubbed, tends to like have more allowance for that in the animation so you can actually get the line out in a natural way. But particularly older anime, and in this case, I'll consider this in that category. Like a lot of it was just not made with that in mind. And so when the English voice actors were on, I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like you just don't have a chance to catch a breath saying your line. It just like it stresses me out listening to you.
Mhm.
So with older stuff, I tend to prefer sub, but that might just be me.
I tend to prefer dubs myself just because I like to appreciate the art more. But I actually did watch this one in the subs, and it was actually really enjoyable that way because it kind of gave it to me. It gave it more of that ancient mythological feel because it is spoken in maybe not the language of the time period they're trying to capture, but the original language of the culture. And yeah, it felt more natural to me that way. I have seen clips of the dub, and I'm actually pretty glad I watched it in the subs because it was just it just felt more, like I said, it felt more mythical to me when I watched it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate wanting to hear the original language. One benefit I have not having any experience with anime really beyond this is that I'm just very uncritical of that sort of thing because I don't really know what it's supposed to be or what good dubbing is, I guess. So it was an easy win for me on that front.
That's fair.
This
It's
one,
also a valid point that like there's a cultural association that we go through mentally when we do hear a foreign language that does work very well for certain kinds of stories. Like, it's not a TV show, but I was just playing one of the Yakuza video games recently, which apparently they've released dubs for some of those. But I played this one. This was Yakuza Zero, the original version, which didn't have a dub, and so I watched it in Japanese. But it's like it takes place in Japan, in like 80s Japan, in like Tokyo, and it's like it feels like the character should be talking in Japanese, right? It feels weird. I'd like, why would I want to listen to that in English? So I feel like that there's a good argument Princess Mononoke would fit in a similar category where it's like it's very steeped in Japanese historical culture, so the language would feel like it should fit that.
Yeah, playing Yakuza in the dub is a crime against humanity.
But apparently Mark Hamill voiced one of the Majima in one of the
Yeah, in the original PlayStation 2 version, but we're getting
Yeah,
sidetracked here.
that's far afield. Sorry, I was just using that as an example.
I think that Mononoke is a film that should be watched multiple times, and so I have watched it both in dub and sub, and I think both are beautiful. So I think I don't have a problem with anyone who experiences it either way. I think it should be watched both ways, honestly, just because it's a film that rewards rewatching, and just the sheer beauty of the landscapes and the characters and the emotions and the music are worth experiencing multiple times.
Did anybody stay for the credits that watched the dub?
Yep.
Okay.
Nope. What did I miss?
So Neil Gaiman is the one they hired to translate uh the script for the English dub, I believe it is.
He's on
So
the behind the scenes too.
is he? Yeah,
Yep.
see.
Interesting.
I've never done the dub. It's always been subtitles for me. Just for that inflection purpose and just to get a better sense of what they were going for. But yeah, that's one of the biggest things, and I don't know. I always miss something in when it comes to English, and I'm pretty sure the subtitles were the same as well. This was first brought to America by Miramax back in the day, so I know it's gone through a couple of changes, and they've redone the English translation um, from the original people that they got to translate. So there's different versions out there that you can get a hold of.
I was wondering if anyone would mention Gaiman, given how controversial he is right now.
Well, do we have anything else to say about this movie?
Everyone should watch it.
And
I
Andrew
can.
should binge Dragon Ball Z.
What?
Step at a time.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I was just gonna say real quick that I definitely see the cultural impact, not just on more modern anime, but also I didn't grow up on anime either. I started watching it in more recent years, but I did grow up on the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, and that series was heavily inspired by, I believe they said Spirited Away and then this film. Those were the two like main ones. And what's funny is I actually see in the sequel series to that show, there's actually quite a bit of impact from this film on. There's a two-part arc that goes back into the history of the world and everything, and it just I see the impact on that. I've seen like I said, on more modern anime. And then, it just maybe it's just because it's a traditional fairy tale. You kind of see that impact also in more modern fantasy stories that aren't going the whole nihilist road. Um, but yeah, I definitely appreciated going back and seeing where some of this inspiration and influence came from. It was really interesting to see.
I can end with the final words that he wrote in the memo. Um, Princess Mononoke does not purport to solve the problems of the entire world. The battle between rampaging forest gods and humanity cannot end well. There can be no happy ending. Yet, even amid the hatred and slaughter, there are things worthy of life. It is possible for wonderful encounters to occur and for beautiful things to exist. This is the film. This is the kind of film I want to make.
All right. Well, thank you for selecting this movie for me to watch. I did enjoy it. I've enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to where we go next, and which I don't know where that's going to be. But so to figure out where we go next, I've got a random number generator here on my phone. I'm going to count myself as number one. You each kind of go around clockwise with a number. I'll count Jacob. You'll be number seven. And let's see who gets to pick the next movie unilaterally. The only guideline is I don't feel like I need to say this, but don't pick anything like horribly obscene. That's the guideline on that. So let's see. Number four, that's Micah.
Oh
All
my
right.
goodness. Thankfully, I thought about this one. I was thinking Godzilla minus one, which is a Godzilla movie, but surprisingly heavy on themes. It kind of blew my mind when I watched it, even though I'm not a Godzilla fan.
Oh, that's good.
All
I
right.
am a Godzilla fan, but it is more about the humans than it is about
Mhm.
the monster. So,
It
yeah,
is.
good pick.
I am also not a Godzilla fan, and I actually really love that movie, so that's a great pick.
Cool. And
I
I
have
have
an
not seen
excuse
it.
to watch
So,
it
yeah.
in black and white.
All right, cool. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll meet in a couple weeks for that one. And then next week, we are meeting for the games podcast for The Forgotten City. So we'll stay tuned for that. All right. Well, thanks for coming together. Thanks for talking about this movie and for getting me to watch anime. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Mythic Mind Movies and Shows. If you would like to join the next conversation, then just become a patron at any level over at patreon.com/mythicmind, or just click that link in the show notes. The next thing to come out from Mythic Mind will be Paradise Lost Book 4 on the main Mythic Mind podcast. I'll talk to you then.